So let's start off with where we left off last time in reviewing Atomic Habits so I can further explain what the core ideas of this book are. So, last time I talked about the fundamentals of Atomic Habits, and the first thing to know about habits is marginal gains, which essentially just explained why habits are so powerful and why it might be the case that their effects are not immediately obvious even if they are so powerful. And we had the example of the exponential growth, ice cubes, etc. The second thing was, in order to build habits to persist while the effects are not obvious, we need to create good systems around what we do. And the book dives into ideas between the difference of systems and goals, how goals are only temporary, they don't bring you true happiness, etc., while systems are there for the long run. You build systems to run even when you're not paying attention, and that's essentially how you want your habits to be, actions that you almost take unconsciously that make your life a lot easier. And we also went through a practical example of how we can leverage systems to keep our room clean instead of always just finding the motivation to clean your room. And in order to build systems, we covered the three layers of change, in which the most important is identity, because who you believe you are will affect what kind of processes and systems you build, which will affect the results. So you do what you believe yourself capable of doing, you do what you believe is consistent with your self identity, and those actions become processes which further feed back into that identity. So identity is a self fulfilling prophecy. And due to those processes, we then get the outcomes. But that's not really, the outcomes are not exactly what we're after, even though they are the end goal, because goals are not as important as setting up systems. Right. And so later on in the book, the author breaks down habits into 4 different steps to more easily compartmentalize what each one does. So the first step we have is the cue, like what triggers you to do something. You know how you might go like weeks without wanting to play video games, but then you see a YouTube video of someone playing that video game and you're like, oh shit, that looks really fun. I want to play it now. So the video itself is the cue. You didn't want to do it until you saw it. The second step of habits is the craving. Like, it has to be something you actually want to do to some extent. Uh, and we can cover this later in the reward. It might be a rewarding task after you complete it, but typically it's easier if we make the process of starting the task more enjoyable. The third thing will be the response, like the actual action of doing it. And there are also a few things you can work on here to make the actual action of doing that habit a little more seamless. And lastly, we have the reward. What do you actually get from the action, every habit, no matter how good or bad, gives you some kind of reward. Even if you say smoking kills you in the long run, in the short term, it'll ease your nerves and it makes you calm down. And so that's the reward of smoking. Everything you do has some sort of reward. If there were no reward, we just wouldn't do it. So those are the 4 steps to how habits actually work. And then he breaks this down into 4 laws, and I'll cover the first few today, but I'm not done reviewing all of the habits, all of the laws yet. So the first law is, how do we build effective cues? So, as how a smoker doesn't want to smoke until he sees a cigarette, until he smells the smell of cigs, how do we make the cues or habits more obvious? And the easiest way to do that is through our environment. The author recommends that we can set aside some space to do certain tasks. So I only work when I'm at my desk. I only game when I'm doing this. I only read when I'm sitting on my beanbag, and I only sleep when I'm on my bed. And over time, the idea is that by doing one thing at one place, over time, your body and your mind starts to associate that place with that action. So whenever I lie down on my bed, I instantly want to sleep. Whenever I'm sitting at my desk, I instantly want to work. And then your environment will be made of relationships. So in order to design an environment, you have to look at everything in your environment and then ask yourself, what is the relationship I have with this item in this space? So let's just say I have my gaming mouse at my desk. What's my relationship with my gaming mouse? Well, to play games. So basically, by leaving that gaming mouse in my peripheral, I'm just saying that, the relationship with this space is gaming. But instead, I replace my gaming mouse with my productivity mouse. I'm automatically like, okay, the relationship between me and that mouse in this space is work, so I'm more inclined to work. So we start thinking about our spaces not just as, the space and the items, but more like relationships. What relationships do you have with each item in your space? And then from understanding that, you can design your space in such a way that only the relationships you want to be there are still there. So I'll have my keyboard, my iPad, and my mouse, and that's it. I don't have speakers because I don't want to watch YouTube. I don't have my headset because I don't want to play video games, and I don't have my gaming mouse because, again, I don't want to play video games. All right. The second part about making the cues obvious, he talks about the scorecards a little bit, and they're not directly related into how we make cues more obvious, but they're more on the lines of the idea that a lot of people don't even know what the cues are, and a lot of people don't even understand what their actual habits are. So many people will go their entire lives without even being consciously aware of what habits they have, right? Like, you don't understand that, you don't know that, it's hard to catch yourself in the immediate moment you're craving a cigarette. You just know that you're craving a cigarette, right? But the idea of scorecards here is that whatever action you do, you can write down, or you can like call out, in a sense, to make it more obvious what the cue is and what the habit is. And once we have that, it's more obvious. We can engineer our environment and our lifestyle in such a way that to make the cues of good habits more available and more obvious, and we make the cues of bad habits invisible and less obvious. Which kind of leads us to the inversion of the law of making it obvious. Obviously, if I don't want to play video games, I shouldn't have Steam open, or I shouldn't have Team Fortress 2 running, or I shouldn't have my gaming mouse right in front of my face, right? Okay, so the next thing we can do for making it more obvious is stacking habits. So essentially, this makes it more obvious because over time, you will associate doing one habit that you already do with a habit that you want to do. And how does this stacking habit actually work? So let's just say I want to remember to put on my contact lens every morning, but I already brush my teeth every morning. So the easiest way to make myself remember to put on contact lenses is just to tell myself, okay, every time I finish brushing my teeth, I'll put on contacts, right? Or if I want to do skincare at night, I can just tell myself, okay, every time I shut down my computer, I'll go and do skincare. Or every time I finish brushing my teeth at night, I'll just go do skincare. And by making these habits, by stacking a new habit on top of an old habit that we already do on the daily, it makes it a lot easier for us to do the new habit, because in our minds, like, after I do the old habit, I'll immediately do the new habit. So that's just another way of making it a little more obvious. And when we combine environment and stacking habits, we get something called implementation intentions, which is essentially what do we actually do to make the good cues more obvious and the bad cues less obvious. And we can do this by simply say, I would do X behavior at X time in X location. So if I want to get work done, I will work on my P set at 3 p.m. at my desk. And by saying it out loud or like writing it down, it becomes a lot more real. And the author gives us an example by telling a story about how a lot of people who were in an experiment about how we can get people to consistently work out. And the ones that consistently worked out were the ones who actually made concrete plans for when they would work out and where they would work out. And so we can apply the same thing to everyday lives. And implementation intentions is actually just the way we use cues to build habits, if you think about it simply. So that's just the power of cues. We have to make the things we want obvious and make the things we don't want invisible. And we do that environment, stacking habits, and using implementation intentions, which are just a combination of these two factors above. All right, the second law would just be craving. So to abuse our craving like response, we have to make sure that our habits are in some sense attractive. So I'm not going to run every day if I hate running and I force myself to run every day, because that uses motivation. And even though it might work, it's not the best way for building habits, and it decreases my chance of successfully building that habit, right? So to make a habit attractive, actually, I'll cover this another time. I haven't really worked on this yet.